Stop the car now. The words tore from my throat with a raw power that startled even me. My husband, George, nearly wrenched our sedan off the highway shoulder. We were traveling somewhere deep in northern Vermont, the pine forests dense and close, perhaps an hour from the Montreal border crossing, when every fiber of my being started screaming a warning. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I gripped the armrest, my focus locked on a plain black overnight bag sitting innocently in the back seat. "Clara, what in the world is happening?" George asked. His voice strained as the traffic sped past us, oblivious to the sudden silent crisis unfolding inside our vehicle. Minutes before, my son, Dennis, had called me. His voice, usually guarded or demanding, had been strangely soft, almost sickly sweet, asking if the exact bag, the one his wife Serena had dropped off, had made it into our car. But it wasn't the question that paralyzed me. It was the parting remark. "I love you, Mom. You know that, right? I really, really love you." In 42 years, that boy had perhaps spoken those words to me maybe a handful of times, and never, absolutely never, during a casual conversation about luggage security. The intensity, the desperate undertone, it resonated deep in the pit of my stomach. This was not a moment of sudden filial affection. This was a goodbye. "Something's not right, George," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "We need to turn around. Right now." George didn't question the urgency in my voice, not after 50 years of marriage. He knew the difference between a mother's worry and a primal, life-saving alarm. He waited patiently for a break in the heavy traffic flow, executed a difficult U-turn across the divided highway, and started heading back south toward Springfield. I knew that what I was about to find inside that bag would change everything I thought I understood about my son, his wife, and the family I had spent half a decade desperately holding afloat. Their plan for me, their willingness to sacrifice my entire future just to solve their chronic money problems. It was so devastatingly criminal, so unthinkable, that the only reason I could move was the terrifying realization that if we had continued for another hour, both George and I would have been swallowed whole by their catastrophic choices. To truly grasp the gravity of that moment on the side of the road, you need to understand the 5 years that led up to it. 5 years where my love, my savings, and my relentless support had been completely taken for granted, culminating in a betrayal that could have ended my life as I knew it. My name is Clara Albright. I am 68 years old, and I live with George in our comfortable, 3-bedroom home in Springfield, Massachusetts. After decades working as a school secretary, I retired with a modest pension and some savings we had carefully accumulated. Life was quiet, predictable, and peaceful, until 5 years ago when the rug was pulled out from under Dennis's family. Dennis had been a warehouse supervisor for nearly 15 years. Suddenly, at 42, his company downsized. He found himself out of work with Serena, who held a part-time job at a nail salon, and our 3-year-old grandson Leo to support. The job market was brutal. Even when Dennis found temporary work, the pay was never sufficient to match their old income. As his mother, how could I simply watch them struggle? It began innocently. A couple $100 here and there for groceries when things were tight. Gas money so Dennis could travel to job interviews. Then their landlord announced a steep rent hike, and they couldn't cover the difference. What choice did I have? I wasn't going to allow my grandson to be evicted. Before I fully realized the depth of the commitment, I was covering most of their major monthly expenses. Their rent, the payments on their 2 cars, their insurance, and all the utilities. I even started buying all their groceries and paying for Leo's daycare so Serena could maintain her part-time earnings. "Mom, I promise this is just temporary," Dennis would assure me whenever I handed him a check. "As soon as I get back on my feet, I'll pay you back every penny." Serena would nod in agreement, though I always noted a certain lack of genuine gratitude in her eyes. Sometimes I'd catch her rolling her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, or making passive-aggressive comments about how some people have it easier than others. I pushed those feelings aside, repeating the mantra, "Family helps family." And oh, how I cherished my time with Leo. I was babysitting him almost every weekend, taking him to the park, reading him stacks of books, and spoiling him the way grandmothers are meant to. Those moments provided the emotional fuel that made every check I wrote seem worthwhile. George would sometimes express concern. "Clara, honey, we need to be cautious about our own retirement fund," he would gently remind me. But I couldn't bear the anxiety of Leo going without. Besides, George and I were managing fine on our pensions and Social Security income. The years blurred together. Dennis would land a job, lose it, find another that didn't pay enough. I remained the steadfast safety net, writing checks and covering shortfalls, holding their entire lives together. By the time Leo started elementary school, I realized I had been their consistent support system for nearly 5 years straight. Not occasionally, not just during true emergencies, but every single month. They had never once had to worry about making ends meet because Grandma Clara was always there to fill the void. I genuinely believed I was being a loving mother, helping them navigate a rough chapter until they could regain their footing. What I failed to realize was that somewhere along the line, my selfless generosity had stopped being perceived as a gift. To Dennis and Serena, it had solidified into an obligation. They had become so dependent on my support that they began to expect it, to build their budget around it, and to view my retirement savings as an extension of their own income. It was only when I finally, for the first time in those 5 long years, refused one of their requests, that I discovered how little they valued me beyond my bank account. Last January, everything shifted following one critical phone call. Leo was attending the local public elementary school and, by all reports, was thriving academically. But Serena called, spinning a tale of immediate disaster. "Clara, he is being viciously bullied," she claimed, her voice dripping with dramatic concern. "These kids are so cruel, making fun of his clothes, excluding him from everything. The teachers don't care, and the class sizes are enormous. He comes home crying almost every single day." My heart immediately ached for my grandson. What grandmother wouldn't be devastated to hear her precious child was suffering? "There's a wonderful private academy across town," Dennis quickly chimed in, picking up the thread. "Small class sizes, excellent anti-bullying programs, and genuine individual attention. It would solve all his problems." "That sounds absolutely perfect," I conceded, already picturing Leo thriving in a better environment. "What do you need me to do?" Serena's voice lowered conspiratorially. "Well, the tuition is pretty steep. It's about $15,000 for the remainder of the school term, and after that, it goes up to $18,000 annually." My stomach dropped. Those figures were enormous, exponentially higher than any sum they had ever requested before. Yet, the thought of Leo's tearful face nearly made me say yes right then and there. "Let me think about this," I heard myself say, pulling back instinctively. "That's significantly more than our usual level of assistance." Silence fell on the line. I could almost feel their surprise and frustration emanating through the phone. "Mom," Dennis said slowly, his tone laced with subtle accusation, "this is about your grandson's happiness and future. Surely that's worth any amount of money." For 3 days I wrestled with the dilemma. George and I looked over our budget, our retirement projections, and our own financial security. We realized we could afford it, but it would necessitate making significant, uncomfortable changes to our future plans. However, something else was deeply unsettling me. In all the times I had recently spent with Leo, he seemed perfectly happy. He was chatty about his friends, excited about his school projects, and never once mentioned bullying or problems. When I gently asked him about school, he had simply shrugged, said it was fine, and returned to playing. Finally I called them back. "I've thought about this very carefully," I told Dennis and Serena. "I love our boy more than anything, but I think we need to explore other options first. Maybe we could meet with his teachers or research the school's current anti-bullying programs, or even consider a different public school before we jump straight into private education." The silence that followed was glacial. "So, you are saying no?" Serena asked flatly. "I'm saying let's try alternate solutions first, before committing to such a large and permanent expense," I replied, striving to maintain a calm and reasonable demeanor. "Unbelievable," I heard her mutter audibly to Dennis. "Some grandmother." The call ended abruptly after that, with hollow promises that they would look into the other options. Promises I knew instantly they had no intention of keeping. Within a week of that conversation, everything changed. My customary weekend babysitting sessions were abruptly cancelled. "We're busy this weekend," became the standard cold response when I called to ask about seeing Leo. Monthly family dinners at their house simply stopped being mentioned. When I called just to chat with Leo, the conversations were always awkward and rushed. "He's doing homework," or "he's playing with friends," or "it's not a good time," became Serena's usual dismissive replies. The worst encounter happened one afternoon when I ran into them unexpectedly at the Springfield grocery store. Leo saw me and his face instantly lit up. He ran over, throwing his small arms around my waist for a joyful hug. But when Serena noticed, she immediately yanked him back with a sharp, "Come on, Leo, we need to go." She barely acknowledged my presence, offering only a cold nod before rushing off. My own grandson looked utterly confused by his mother's frigid behavior toward me. I saw the confusion in his innocent eyes. He couldn't understand why Grandma Clara was suddenly unwelcome in their lives. For the first time in decades of providing assistance, I had dared to set one single boundary, asked for one pause to consider alternatives, and this was their immediate, devastating response. The message was unmistakable. My sole value to them was financial. The woman who had covered their expenses, cared for their child, and acted as their reliable safety net for half a decade was being summarily punished for daring to say, "Let's think about this," instead of simply writing a check. 2 agonizing months dragged by like this. 2 months of being shut out, missing Leo terribly, and constantly questioning whether I had made a terrible mistake. I started thinking perhaps I should just pay the tuition and get my loved ones back. It was precisely at that moment of weakness and guilt that they called with their sudden change of heart and the invitation that would eventually lead us to that perilous highway in northern Vermont. Looking back, I realized those 2 months of cold isolation were never punishment for saying no. They were the calculated preparation for something infinitely worse. It was early April when my phone rang, and I heard Dennis's voice, sounding more cheerful and warm than it had in months. "Hey Mom, how are you and Dad doing?" he asked with an enthusiastic exuberance that immediately put me on guard. After 2 months of barely speaking to us, this dramatic shift felt jarring and false. "We're fine, dear," I replied cautiously. "How is everyone there?" "Great, actually. That's why I'm calling. Serena and I have been talking and we realize we've been way too stressed about everything. We thought it would be wonderful for all of us to get away together, spend some real quality time as a family." My heart leaped despite the suspicion. I had missed them terribly, especially Leo. "Serena's cousin has this beautiful isolated cabin up by a lake near Montreal," he continued. "She invited us all up for a long weekend. You, Dad, me, Serena, and Leo. What do you think?" The idea of a joint trip, of regaining the lost connection with my family, was exactly what I had been hoping for. Maybe they had finally realized that our relationship was more important than disagreements about school fees. "That sounds truly wonderful," I told him, allowing hope to creep in. "When were you planning on going?" "This coming weekend, actually. I know it's short notice, but the cousin just had a last-minute cancellation, and the weather is supposed to be perfect. It would be such a fantastic opportunity for Leo to see his grandparents and for all of us to reconnect." We made arrangements for them to drive up with us. George and I had a spacious SUV that could fit everyone comfortably. Dennis mentioned they were bringing fishing gear and games for Leo. "Oh, and Mom," Dennis added, just as we were wrapping up the call, his voice becoming casual again. "Would you mind carrying one extra bag for us? Our car is packed really tight with all the kids' stuff and fishing equipment. It's just a small black overnight bag." "Of course, sweetheart," I said without hesitation. What grandmother wouldn't help carry an extra bag? The night before we left, Serena dropped off the bag at our house. It was indeed a standard black nylon overnight bag, completely unremarkable. She was actually quite pleasant, chatting about how thrilled Leo was for the trip and effusively thanking us for agreeing to help with the transportation. He's been talking about seeing Grandma Clara and Grandpa George all week, she said with a smile that, for the first time in months, seemed genuine. This trip is going to be so good for all of us. I went to bed that night feeling a cautious, yet profound sense of optimism. The next morning we decided to take 2 cars, given the volume of luggage, fishing equipment, and supplies they were bringing for the long weekend. George and I took our SUV, carrying the overnight bag and some of the gear, while Dennis drove their car with Serena and Leo following closely behind us. The drive started perfectly. Leo kept waving frantically at us from their back seat, and we'd pull alongside at traffic lights so he could enthusiastically show us his travel games and snacks. It felt exactly like old times, like we were once again the close-knit, happy unit I desperately missed. We had been driving for about 3 hours, making excellent time toward the border, when my phone rang. It was Dennis calling from their car behind us. "Mom, hey, quick question," he said, and the nervous tremor in his tone immediately put every one of my senses on high alert. "Yes, honey. That bag Serena gave you. You've got it with you, right? It made it into the car." "Yes, of course, Dennis. It's right here next to me." "Good. And you haven't? I mean, you didn't need to move anything around in it or anything, right?" The question was intensely odd. Why would I possibly be rummaging through their private overnight bag? "No, sweetheart, I haven't touched it." "Why?" "Oh, no reason. Just making sure everything's secure for the border crossing. You know how careful they are these days." He paused, and then delivered the phrase that crystallized all my dread, sending icy chills down my spine. "I love you, Mom. You know that, right? I really, really love you." My son had never, in his entire adult existence, called me solely to express his love. Never. And certainly never with that breathy, terrified intensity. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the device. Every maternal instinct I had honed over 7 decades was now screaming at maximum volume. "Turn the car around now." I shouted the words to George, the command that saved us both. We pulled over at the very next exit ramp. While George tried to calmly divert Dennis and Serena's attention via quick text about needing to check the tire pressure, I quietly reached into the back seat and opened that innocent-looking overnight bag. What I found inside instantly froze my blood. Carefully concealed beneath Leo's neatly folded pajamas and some of his favorite stuffed toys were small, dense packages tightly wrapped in plastic. Even at my age, having read the news, I wasn't naive enough to mistake what I was looking at. Drugs. A significant border-crossing quantity of illegal substances. My own son and his wife had planned to use me as an unwitting mule, a drug smuggler across an international boundary. They had banked on my love for Leo, my desperation to repair our relationship, and my absolute decades-long trust in them, to carry their illegal cargo without question. If we had been caught at the border checkpoint, and given how meticulous the agents were, we very well might have been. I, Clara Albright, 68 years old, a retired school secretary, would have been the one facing federal charges for drug trafficking. I would have been looking at years in a federal prison. Dennis's frantic phone call wasn't a check on the bag. It was him emotionally unraveling because he knew he was about to completely destroy his mother's life to bail himself out of his own dire problems. The worst, most gut-wrenching realization was that this entire reunion trip had been concocted the moment I refused the tuition payment. The 2 months of cold treatment, the sudden dramatic reconciliation, the urgent, short timeline, the convenient cousin's cabin. All of it had been a meticulously engineered plot to leverage my love and my trust into committing a massive federal crime. As I stared at those packages nestled among Leo's innocent pajamas, I grasped the horrifying truth. My own child was willing to sacrifice everything I held dear, my freedom, my reputation, my entire future, rather than learn to live within his means or find a legal solution to his devastating financial troubles. In that moment of terrible, crystalline clarity, the Clara who had spent half a decade enabling and subsidizing their poor choices vanished forever. George came back to the car quietly, his eyes dark with confusion. "What did you find, honey?" I simply showed him the contents of the bag without uttering a word. His face went white, then set hard with a cold, terrifying anger I had rarely witnessed in our 50 years together. "We're going home," he stated simply, his voice low and absolute. "Right now." From their car behind us, I could see Dennis getting agitated, likely wondering why we had stopped for so long. My phone started ringing again, but I powered it off. I could not bear to hear his voice, knowing the monstrous calculation he had made. The drive back to Springfield was silent between George and me, but my mind was a terrifying whirlwind. Every moment of the past 2 months suddenly snapped into place. The cold shoulder after the tuition refusal wasn't just punishment. It was preparation. They needed to create emotional distance so that when they suddenly offered this trip, I would be so overwhelmed by relief and gratitude for the reconciliation that I wouldn't ask any inconvenient questions. They had manipulated my love, my desperation to repair the family, and my trust to bring me inches from ruin. When we finally pulled into their driveway in Springfield, Dennis and Serena were already out of their car, looking confused and rapidly escalating into panic. "Mom, what is going on?" Dennis yelled as I walked toward their front door, holding the black overnight bag. "Why did we turn around? We were almost there." I set the bag down gently on their doorstep and looked at my son. I truly looked at him. When had he become this person? When had his struggle for money turned him into someone willing to sacrifice his own mother's freedom for his convenience? "I know what's in the bag," I said quietly. The color instantly drained from both their faces. Serena instinctively grabbed Dennis's arm, and I saw them exchange rapid, panicked glances. "Mom, I can explain," Dennis started, stumbling over his words. "No," I cut him off, my voice steady despite the lingering tremor in my hands. "There is nothing to explain. You planned to use me to commit a federal crime. You were willing to let me face years in prison just to solve your financial problems. It wasn't like that." Serena burst out hysterically. "We were desperate. We owe people a significant amount and they were threatening us. We thought if we could just make one trip. You thought you could sacrifice me instead of dealing with your own choices," I finished for her. Leo stood frozen behind them, looking utterly bewildered and scared by the frightening behavior of the adults. My heart shattered for him, caught in the wreckage of his parents' terrible decisions. "I want you to listen to me very carefully," I continued, my voice growing stronger, a final, unshakable resolution settling within me. "I will no longer be providing any financial assistance to this household. No rent help, no car payments, no groceries, no emergency funds. Nothing." "Mom, you can't be serious," Dennis pleaded, desperation making his voice raw. "We depend on that support. We can't survive without it." "Then you will need to figure out how to survive, won't you?" I replied, the same way millions of other responsible adults manage their finances, without putting their mothers at risk for federal drug charges. I turned to walk back toward our car, but Dennis grabbed my arm. "Please, just think about this. We made a mistake, but if you cut us off now, we'll lose everything. The house, the cars, everything." I gently pulled my arm free and looked at him one last time, my face devoid of pity. "You were willing to let me lose everything. My freedom, my reputation, my entire future. Now, you will have to face the consequences of your own choices." As George slowly pulled the SUV away, I watched them in the rearview mirror, standing immobile in their driveway, still holding that black nylon bag. They were finally realizing that their financial safety net, the one they had relied on for 5 years, was gone forever. That night, back in my kitchen in Springfield, I sat down and meticulously made a list of every automatic payment, every monthly check, and every form of assistance I had been providing. The total was staggering. I had subsidized their entire lifestyle for so long that I had genuinely forgotten what our own budget looked like without those massive recurring expenses. Within a week, I canceled every single form of support. The bank accounts they had emergency access to, the credit card I had given them for food, the automatic payments for their car insurance. All of it ceased. I also took a crucial step for my own safety. I contacted a lawyer, describing exactly what had transpired. He was horrified by their calculated scheme and helped me document everything immediately, ensuring a clear legal record existed in case they ever tried to claim I had been involved willingly. For the first time in decades, I was unequivocally putting my own safety and well-being ahead of my son's convenience. It didn't feel selfish. It felt like the most responsible thing I had ever done. By enabling their catastrophic choices for so long, I hadn't been helping them. I had been preventing them from learning how to solve their own problems, how to live within their means, and how to make truly adult decisions about their lives. Now, finally, they would be forced to. 4 harrowing weeks after I cut them off, reality hit Dennis and Serena hard. My phone began ringing constantly. First, it was Dennis, then Serena, sometimes even using Leo's phone to try and shame or guilt me into answering. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages started out venomous. "Mom, our credit cards are being declined everywhere. You cannot just abandon us like this." Then they dissolved into desperate pleading. "Please, Clara, we are about to lose the house. Just help us one more time, and we swear we'll figure something else out." But I had heard those hollow promises too many times over 5 long years. This time I remained absolutely strong. Then came the call from Serena's sister, whom I barely knew. "Clara, I think you should know this," she said quietly. "Serena and Dennis are planning to try that trip again. But this time they're going themselves. They're desperate, and I'm genuinely worried they're going to do something truly stupid." My blood ran cold. Even after the exposure, even after the direct confrontation, they were still prioritizing drug trafficking over finding legal ways to manage their debt. "When are they leaving?" I managed to ask. "This weekend. They asked me to watch Leo. They told me they were going on a business trip for a couple of days." I immediately contacted my lawyer. He strongly advised me to contact the authorities with this concrete information. Yet, even after everything they had tried to do to me, I simply couldn't bring myself to make that call. That Saturday morning I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Clara Albright?" a woman's professional voice inquired. "Yes, this is she. This is Officer Martinez with U.S. Border Patrol. Your son, Dennis Albright, and daughter-in-law, Serena Albright, were arrested early this morning attempting to cross into Canada with illegal substances. They listed you as their emergency contact." My hands were shaking, but strangely not from shock. I had known this call was inevitable, the only logical outcome of their continued recklessness. "Their son," I managed to say, focusing instantly on the only person who truly mattered. "Where is Leo?" "He is currently with a family member, but Child Protective Services needs to arrange proper placement since you are listed as next of kin." Within hours, I was at the agency filling out emergency custody paperwork. Leo, confused and terrified, came home with George and me that same afternoon, clutching a small suitcase and his favorite stuffed animal. "Grandma Clara?" he asked that first night as I tucked him into the guest bedroom that would eventually become his permanent room. "When are Mom and Dad coming back?" How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his parents chose to risk everything, including him, rather than learn to live responsibly? "They made some bad choices, sweetheart," I told him gently, smoothing his hair. "But you are safe here now with Grandpa George and me. And we are going to take very good care of you." Over the next few months, the legal process unfolded exactly as predicted. Dennis and Serena were sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. The house they couldn't afford without my support went into foreclosure, and their cars were repossessed. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only profound sadness that their greed had culminated in such an avoidable disaster, and immense relief that Leo was finally safe. The custody hearing was straightforward. Dennis and Serena, facing significant prison time and realizing the risk of Leo being placed in the state foster care system, reluctantly agreed to sign temporary custody over to me. Leo started at a new school near our house, the same excellent public school where I had once worked as a secretary. No expensive private academy was ever necessary. Just caring adults and a stable, predictable environment. The teachers remembered me fondly and went out of their way to help him adjust. In the evenings, he would do his homework at my kitchen table while I prepared dinner. George taught him how to play chess and helped him with his math. We read stories together every night, just as I had done with Dennis when he was small. Slowly, Leo's confusion faded, replaced by a sense of security he had never truly experienced before. There were no more parents shouting about bills, no more uncertainty about whether the lights would stay on, and no more adults making desperate choices that endangered everyone. "Grandma," he said to me one day, about 6 months after he had come to live with us, "I like it here. It's quiet." That's when I truly understood what we had all been missing: peace. Simple, ordinary peace that springs from living within one's means, making responsible choices, and always prioritizing the well-being of the children first. I am 73 now. I have learned that sometimes the most loving act you can perform is to refuse to enable destructive, self-serving behavior, even, and especially when it comes from your own child. I will spend whatever time I have left raising Leo to be the kind of man who solves problems honestly, treats others with respect, and never asks someone else to pay the devastating price for his mistakes. That is the story of how a grandmother's protective instinct and willingness to finally set a hard boundary saved not just her own life, but gave her grandson the stable childhood his parents could not provide.